Okay, this section of notes is solving quadratic equations by completing the square. Okay, bell work wise, we need to refresh on how to complete the square. So what I did in first semester was I gave you an expression that looked like this, and we had to fill in that underline. Okay, we had to fill in the blank. And to do that, we took whatever the middle term was, so 22 here, and we divided it by 2, and then squared that. So 22 divided by 2 is 11 squared, which equals 121. So that was the number that got put here. And then in addition to this, I had you also factor it. So what we factored us out to be was we used this thing inside of here. Okay, since this is a positive 11, and we have the variable as x, then my expression factored out to become just that x. And then since that's 11, it's plus 11, quantity squared. Okay, number 2. Number 2, now we have a negative 14 in the middle, so I'm going to put in parentheses negative 14, again divided by 2, squared. Half of negative 14 is negative 7, squared, which is 49. So 49 was the number that went in the blank. And then to factor that, again, then I focus on this simplified version, and whatever my variable was, I have x minus 7, that quantity squared. Okay, you'll notice here that there are several steps with this process. This is probably one of the longer processes, I guess. I don't want to say necessarily complicated, because some of you will be able to do this fairly quick and easy. However, others of you will look at this like it's some kind of foreign language, and you will never understand it. Okay, and again, that's okay. All right, you do have 4 options for solving quadratic equations. And some of you will understand all 4 of them. Others of you will only understand 1. Okay, again, as long as you can solve them, I'm okay. Step 1 here, you're going to move all the x terms to one side of the equation. Okay, again, I'm going to emphasize the fact that x squared has to be positive. Okay. Step 2, then you're going to divide everything by what is in front of the squared term. So if there's a number attached to that for a coefficient, you're going to divide by that number. Step 3, you're going to divide the, I just said that. Step 4, you're going to factor the variable side by making it kind of what we did for bell work, and you're going to set it up that way. Okay. Step 5, you're going to simplify the side with the constants. Step 6, you're going to take the square root of both sides and simplify the side with the radical term. Notes there, do not forget the plus or minus. And then B, if the constant is a negative, then pull the negative out and make it an I. Step 7 there, solve for x and simplify your answer if possible. Okay. Step 8, if you come out again with nice values for the solution, by all means check your answer. If you don't, then it's okay. Okay, so we have 4 examples here. This is a pretty short section, but again, it's an extensive amount of work, so make sure you understand that. Okay. So step 1 there, we had to get the x terms by themselves on one side of the equation. So note, this is one of the only, actually, this is the only Actually, it's not the only one. When we solve by square roots and solve by completing the square, then we don't have this set equal to 0. But by factoring, you have to have it set equal to 0. So you have to make sure that you keep those separated. The x squared term and the x term are on the left side, so we have a perfect setup. So what I'm going to do is complete the square. You'll notice that I'm going to actually write this similar to what the bell work was. Plus, underline, equals 84. The difference between what we had on the bell work and what we have here is that I have an equal sign and I have two sides. Okay, remember, what I do to one side of an equation, I have to also do to the other side of the equation. Okay, so here, when I take the 5 and I divide it by 2, okay, positive 5 here, and I'm going to square it. I'm going to put it on both sides. Okay, this left-hand side, again, should be real quick and easy because whatever the variable is, and whatever the simplified version of this is, because it's already simplified for me, they just drop down. So it's x positive 5/2 squared equals. I have 84, I'm going to make this as 84 over 1. And then 5/2 squared. So 5/2 squared is 5/2 times 5/2. If I multiply across, I have 5 times 5, which is 25, over 2 times 2, which is 4. Again, then to add fractions, I have to have a common denominator. So my common denominator here would be 4. So I need to multiply the top and the bottom here by 4. So I have x plus 5/2 quantity squared equals 336 over 4 plus 25 over 4. Add my fractions, I get x plus 5/2 quantity squared equals 361 over 4. Now, some of you should notice that this ends up being now just solving by square roots. Okay, so the solving by completing the square gives me this back into a form where I'm solving by square roots. So now that I have the squared term by itself, I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Again, if I have a fraction, I'm going to take the square root of the top and bottom separately. These cancel out, so I have x plus 5/2 equals plus or minus. And 361 and 4 are both actually perfect squares. So the square root of 361 is 19. And the square root of 4 is 2. I'm going to then subtract the 5/2 because that's plus there. And I'm going to again put it right here in front. I'm going to try to save some space here, so I'm going to move this over. X equals the negative 5/2 plus or minus the 19/2. And again, if you have something like this where I don't have a square root still, I'm going to then continue my process. So I'm going to separate this into both things. So I have negative 5/2 plus the 19/2. And I have negative 5/2 minus the 19/2. Okay, I'm going to work them out separately. So negative 5 plus the 19 is 19 minus 5, which is 14 over 2, which again then simplifies to be just 7. Taking that bottom one then, negative 5 minus 19 is negative 24 over 2, which is going to simplify then to be negative 12. Okay, so again, my suggestion here is if you have a case like this where I have nice values coming back, plug them into the original equation, check to make sure that the left side is equal to the right side, and if they are, then you're okay. If not, then you need to rework it out. Okay? Over here. Separate this. I need to move this 2x first. I need to again have all my variables to one side. Okay. The other part of this was that the x squared had to have a 1 in front of it. It could not have another number. So here I have to divide everything by 3. Okay, so now I'm working with x squared minus 2/3 x. And again, I'm going to expand this and put plus underline equals the 8/3 plus again an underline. Okay, and again I'm taking half of the middle term. So let's do that in a corner up here. If I take half of negative 2/3, that's the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. So this is negative 2/3 times 1/2, which gives me negative 2 over 6, which here can reduce to be negative 1/3 if I divide the 2 and the 6 by 2. Okay, so that's what's going to happen inside of this blank. I have that negative 1/3 that I just came up with squared. Okay, and then again, working my process down, what's here and what's simplified here, again, are just going to come sliding together. Squared, that just works out the whole process there a little quick and easy. And then on the right side there I have 8/3 plus I have negative 1/3 times negative 1/3. A negative times a negative would make it a positive. 1/3 times 1/3, I multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1. And 3 times 3 is 9. Similar there to what I did here, I need to have a common denominator. So if I look at the 3 and the 9, my common denominator would be 9. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of this fraction by 3. Awesome. So that gives me x minus 1/3 squared equals 24/3, 24/9 plus 1/9. I'm going to add then the 24/9 plus 1/9. That gives me x minus 1/3 squared equals 25 over 9. I'm then in this position now where I can take the square root of both sides. And again, I have a fraction on that right-hand side, so I'm going to take the square root of both the numerator and the denominator separately. Okay, recalling that if the denominator was not a perfect square, I would need to rationalize the denominator. Okay. Taking the square root here, then I have x minus 1/3 equals plus or minus. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 9 is 3, so 5/3. I need to move that 1/3 over. So I'm going to add 1/3. Again, placing it right here in front of the plus or minus. And again, I'm going to try to save some space like I did on the bottom here. X equals 1/3 plus or minus 5/3. Again, I don't have a square root at all, and I can continue. Okay, so 1/3 plus the 5/3 and the 1/3 minus the 5/3. If I take 1 plus 5, I get 6/3, which reduces to be 2. And 1 minus 5 is negative 4/3, which does not reduce. So my answers are 2 and negative 4/3. Okay. Last two. Again, I want to get the x terms alone on the left or right hand side. It doesn't matter which side. Okay. On number 3, I need to move the 8. So we're going to add 8 to both sides. That leaves me x squared minus 7x. Again, I'm going to add, I'm going to leave a blank. Equals 8 plus that same blank. Okay, and again, I'm going to take whatever that b term is. I'm going to divide it by 2, so whatever's here, divided by 2, that's negative 7 over 2 squared. And then the same thing here. Okay, again, this left-hand side, or whatever the x squared term is on, will become just what's there, so x minus 7/2 squared equals, again, now because this is a fraction, I'm going to turn this into a fraction. I'm going to make it 8 over 1 plus negative 7/2 squared is negative 7/2 times negative 7/2. So I'd have negative 7 times negative 7, which is 49. Over 2 times 2, which is 4. Common denominator here is going to be a 4, so I need to multiply this one by 4 in the top and bottom. So I'd have x minus 7/2 squared equals 32 over 4 plus 49 over 4. Again, combining then that right hand side, I have x minus 7/2 equals 81/4. Oh, I forgot my quantity squared. Take the square root of both sides. Again, I have a fraction, so I'm going to do the top and the bottom separately. That leaves me x minus 7/2 equals plus or minus. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 4 is 2. I'm going to add, because that's subtraction, the 7/2. Again, placing it right in front. And again, here I don't have anything square root wise still there, so I'm going to break this up into both cases. So 7/2 plus 9/2. 7/2 minus 9/2. And again, I'm going to work them out one at a time. So 7 plus 9 is 16 over 2, which simplifies to be 8. And then 7 minus 9 is negative 2 divided by 2, which is negative 1. Okay. On to the last one. Again, I want to leave the x squared as positive. So here I'm going to actually move the 4 to the right side, and I'm going to bring that 17x to the left side. So I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and I'm going to subtract 17x as well. So that gives me 4x squared minus 17x equals negative 4. Okay, notice here that I have again a number on the x squared, so I need to divide both sides by said number. Okay, so I'm going to divide both sides, everything, by 4. Which leaves me x squared minus 17 over 4x plus, and again I'm going to leave them blanks, equals negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1, plus again that blank. Okay, similar to the previous page, I'm going to take this and I'm going to work it up top so that we can see it. Negative 17 over 4, if I divide that by 2, again taking half of it, I'm going to multiply that. Times the reciprocal 1/2. That's terrible. Equals, we got negative 17 then divided by 8. So this is negative 17 over 8 squared. Negative 17 over 8 squared. Okay, again, what's here and what's here come together. I have x minus 17 over 8 squared equals, again this is a fraction, so I'm going to have it as negative 1 over 1 plus 17 over 8. Negative 17 over 8 squared would mean I have negative 17 times negative 17, which is 289, over 8 times 8, which is 64. Again, at this point, I need to find a common denominator, so 1 and 64, that common denominator would be 64. So I'm going to multiply here and here by 64. Okay. Then I'm going to combine, so 289 and the negative 64 need to combine, so I have x minus 17 over 8 squared equals, this be 225 over 64. Again, then here I'm going to square root both sides, taking the square root of the numerator and the denominator separately. I have x minus 17/8 equals plus or minus the square root of 225 is 15. Square root of 64 is 8. Okay, and again, then I'm going to take this and I'm going to add, because it's subtraction, 17 over 8, right here in front of the square, or the plus or minus. So x equals 17 over 8 plus or minus 15 over 8. Now again, I have two groups, or two fractions that don't have a square root still. So I'm going to separate this and simplify. So 17 over 8 plus 15 over 8. And 17 over 8 minus 15 over 8. And if I take 17 plus 15, I get 32 over 8, which simplifies to be 4. And if I take 17 over 8 minus 15 over 8, that gives me 2 over 8, which reduces to become 1 over 4 if I divide those by 2 each. Okay, so my answers here are 4 and 1/4. Okay, again, solving by completing the square is a fairly complicated process. I do want you to know that it exists. However, again, I'm a very realistic person and realize that most of you will probably not try to use this system. Okay. Again, I don't care which method you use, as long as you figure out one of them that works best for you. Okay. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, again, by all means, reach out to me.